I should have known it wasn't real when the air forgot to move. Even the birds gone. Even the insects silent. Even my own breath, suspended like a sound I couldn't finish. There were footsteps behind me, but when I turned, nothing. Just fog. Just graves. Just me. Still, I kept walking. Because brides don't stop on their way to the altar. Even when the altar is made of stone. Even when the pews are headstones. Even when your groom is already buried beneath you. They said I'd been chosen. The dress had appeared on my bed at sunrise. Not white, but the color of old teeth. Laced tightly, too tight, like it didn't want me to breathe. There was no invitation. No music. No guests. Only a note, pinned to the bodice. Walk yourself down. He'll be waiting. The cemetery had grown overnight. I knew every grave in town. Names, dates, old flowers. But these stones were new. Wet. Like they'd just been carved in a hurry. And some didn't have names at all. Just the word bride. I kept walking. Because that's what I was taught. A good bride keeps going. Even when the wind carries a voice that whispers, "Turn back, Marin. It's not too late." Even when it sounds like your mother. Even when your mother's been dead for 11 years. The veil kept slipping. It didn't cover my face. Covered my eyes. Blurry memories flashed in its folds. A silver basin. A voice counting backward in Latin. My father crying, not out of pride, but like something was being taken. I stepped past a headstone and saw my name carved into the next one. Marin Rose Ellicott. Born 1996. Died. The year was smudged. Still wet. I wanted to scream. But brides don't scream. They smile. They obey. They don't ask why the aisle smells like old iron and lilies. They walk. At the end of the row where a cross once stood was the altar. It was already open. A long, black box. Draped in petals. Breathing. Yes, breathing. Not like lungs. Like something waking up beneath the lid. And on top, waiting for me, was the ring. Rust-colored. Still warm. I didn't put it on. Climbed onto my finger. My knees gave out. And as the fog closed in behind me, I finally heard the voices. The other brides. Muffled. Panicked. Broken. Don't say yes. They'll bind you in the dirt. He's not a man. He's memory. I pressed my hand to my chest. Something moved inside me. Not a heart. A second heartbeat. Older. Hungrier. The ground trembled. The altar cracked. And a voice, low, familiar, crawling up from the coffin, whispered, "Now you belong to me, Marin." I looked down at my hands. The lace had stitched itself to my skin. The vow was inside me now. And I couldn't even remember what I'd said. The moment the vow gripped my spine, something in me shut off. Not like a switch, more like a lock turning. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't remember who had told me to come here in the first place. The fog thickened around the altar. The gravestones leaned inward, like watchers leaning closer. And I felt them, the others. Not guests, not family, former brides. Their bones rattled in my blood. Their voices hummed behind my eyes. "You said yes. So did we. Now you are ours." I should have turned and run. But brides don't run. They stay. Even when the altar is open. Even when the air smells like something rotting through silk. Even when the ring tightens like a shackle with every breath. Then, just before the ground beneath me cracked, I heard it. Car door slamming. The sound didn't belong. Not in this place. Not in this silence. But it was real. A new sound. Something alive. I turned my head, the veil fought back. But I forced it. At the edge of the cemetery, headlights pierced the fog. Too dim. Flickering. But real. A black sedan, old and battered, idled just outside the rusted gate. And stepping out, a woman in a navy blue coat. Long black gloves. Dark, sharp eyes that scanned the headstones like she already knew where I would be. She wasn't part of this. She didn't belong. And that's what made her dangerous to them. She moved with purpose. No hesitation. No fear. And when she reached the path, the fog parted for her. The ground stilled. The veil flinched. And the moment her foot hit the soil where the vow had been made, The coffin on the altar snapped shut. She saw me, and she smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was recognition. "Marin Ellicott," she said, her voice low, crisp, and scarred with smoke. "Of course it's you. Who are you?" I tried to ask, but no sound came. She didn't seem surprised. "They've already laced your tongue. That's quick. Desperate." She reached into her coat and pulled something out. A photo. Worn. Folded. Burned at the corners. She held it up to my face. It was me. Younger. Maybe 8 years old. Standing next to her. This stranger, with a daisy crown on my head and my eyes closed. But behind us, blurry in the background, the altar. The same one I stood beside now. "I was at your first ceremony," she said. "The one you forgot. You're not a new bride, Marin. You're a recycled one." The ground pulsed. The gravestones groaned. And the voice from the coffin hissed through the soil. "She wasn't invited." "I know," the woman replied aloud, looking down. Then she turned to me and whispered, "That's why I'm here." She knelt beside me, pulled off her gloves. Her fingers were scarred, burned in the shape of rings that never came off. She pressed 2 fingers to my temple. I flinched, but she whispered, "Don't fight. Let it rise." And it did. The memory I was never supposed to have. Flash. I'm 8 again. A basin of water. A room filled with roses and rot. My father holding my hand too tight. My mother whispering, "It's the only way to keep her safe." And that woman, this stranger, standing in the doorway screaming, "She's too young. It won't hold." Flash. A ritual. Not marriage. Binding. To keep the vow alive. To recycle it. To pass it down. So it wouldn't die with the old brides buried too deep to scream. I came back to myself gasping. The woman caught me. "Marin," she said. "They've done this to you before. You weren't chosen. You were groomed. Over and over. Wiped clean each time." My knees buckled. The altar growled. She stood. "They want you to say yes again. But this time with full memory. That seals the curse. Makes you permanent." The ground cracked at our feet. A whisper swirled like smoke from the coffin. "You're too late." She already walked the aisle. The woman held up a blade. Not metal. Something older. Carved bone. Wrapped in red twine. "I didn't come to stop her from walking," she said. "I came to cut the aisle behind her." She turned to me. Eyes sharp. Voice calm. "I can't save you if you're still clinging to what they made you." I looked at the ring on my finger. It had sunk beneath the skin. Veins webbed around it like vines. I nodded. She raised the bone blade and cut my name. Not my skin. Not my flesh. My name. I felt it split from me. And for a moment everything went white. No altar. No veil. No vow. Just air. I woke up gasping, face pressed into cold grass. The woman knelt beside me, eyes wary. "You're not theirs anymore," she said. "But they'll come for you. Because you remember now." I sat up. The cemetery was no longer empty. Figures stood in the distance. Dozens. Brides. All veiled. All watching. None moving. I looked at the woman. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, "Call me Thorn." I was bride one. The others were watching. Still. Silent. Bride after bride. Lined up along the graves like mourners at their own funeral. Some veils were stitched into their skin. Others held bouquets made of hair. All of them, frozen. But their eyes, if they still had them, were locked on me. I had been one of them. For years, maybe longer. A vessel. A recycled promise. Until Thorn cut my name out from under the vow. I looked at her, heart thudding against my ribs. "You said you were bride one." She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. She just said, "I was the first to refuse it out loud. And the last they let live with a voice." That's when I noticed the faint scar across her throat. A single, clean line just above the collarbone. Too precise to be accidental. Too cruel not to be a warning. "I remember you," I whispered. The image returned, quick, jagged, like a blade pushed into the back of my memory. That day at the church ruins. A girl in a torn lavender dress, screaming as they dragged her into the chapel. She screamed once, then never again. You tried to stop my binding. Thorn nodded. I failed. I looked down at my ring finger. The skin was raw now, the ring gone, but something still itched beneath the flesh, like memory waiting to rot through. Thorn stood, brushing moss off her coat. They bound us because we carried something they couldn't control. What was it? I asked. She hesitated. Then, memory, refusal, autonomy, things that don't belong in their version of a bride. She glanced over her shoulder. The fog was curling at the edges of the tree line again. The other brides had not moved, but I could feel it, pressure building in the air, like a held breath. They're waiting, she said, to see if you'll follow. Follow where? To the next part of the vow. I shook my head. I didn't say yes. Thorn looked at me with eyes like glass pressed against fire. You walked the aisle, Marin. You touched the altar. You wore the veil. That's a half vow. I stepped back. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. It's ritual. And rituals aren't meant to be fair. They're meant to bind. She pulled something from her pocket. A torn page from a hymn book, stained with wax and ink. She handed it to me. Bride 1, Thorn Everlyn. Refused at the altar. Memory intact. Voice silenced. I turned it over. Another line. Last recorded rebellion. Vow remains unbroken. I stared at it, the words vibrating like strings in my chest. I looked up. You were the last? She didn't answer. Not with words. But behind her, the trees moved. Not swayed. Shivered. Something stepped forward. Not a person. Not exactly. A tall figure, wrapped in wedding veils that trailed behind it like a train across centuries. No face. No hands. Just a thin silhouette under cloth. But around its neck, a chain of rings, each one blackened, each one engraved with names I couldn't read except one. Thorn. I staggered back. The figure stopped. Thorn didn't move. I whispered, What is it? She swallowed hard. That's the Vowkeeper. Spoke. Not in voice, but through every cell in my skin. Return what was removed. Restore her vow. Or take her place. A surge of panic clawed through me. This isn't about love. Or marriage. This is a curse. Thorn's voice was iron. Worse. It's tradition. The Vowkeeper raised one hand, or what looked like a hand beneath the veil. And the nearest bride took one step forward. Her foot cracked the soil. Another step. And another. Thorn hissed. You have to choose. Choose what? I cried. I didn't ask for this. You have to either finish the ceremony, complete the vow, or destroy the altar entirely. And if I don't? She didn't have to answer. The ring of brides tightened. The Vowkeeper stepped closer. I felt it then, the truth trying to break through the walls of my memory. This had happened before. Not just to me. Not just once. Generations of girls, roped into veils, marched to altars, stripped of their names, their minds, their screams. Some left behind journals. Some etched warnings in bone. Some were simply forgotten. I backed toward the chapel entrance. We have to run. Thorn didn't follow. I can't, she said softly. I broke the vow, but my name still lives here. I'm bound to this ground. Her eyes locked on mine. But yours is freshly severed. That makes you dangerous to them. You're the first in a century with memory and movement. The brides stopped. One by one, their heads turned in unison to me. Take her place. Return the balance. The vow must be fulfilled. Thorn leaned in. Her breath ghosted against my cheek. Go to the altar. Tear the veil from its roots. Burn the names. And whatever happens, don't let them rewrite yours. I looked back one last time. Her smile cracked into something fierce. Tell the earth what I never could. No. The fog exploded behind me as I ran. Gravestones groaned. The Vowkeeper screamed without sound. And all the brides began to move. The chapel didn't creak when I stepped inside. It breathed. Not air. Not warmth. Memory. It pressed against my skin like fingers in the dark, trying to remind me of something I hadn't yet agreed to remember. The wooden pews groaned with invisible weight. The red carpet, faded to rust, was worn down in a perfect path. Hundreds of feet must have walked that same route, but only a few ever walked back. At the front, the altar stood like a coffin flipped on its side. Black wood, cracks filled with dried wax, and in the middle an old book. Its pages moved, without wind, like something inside it was breathing too. I stepped closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But if I didn't stop this now, I'd never stop running. Not from them, from myself, because whatever I had once forgotten still lived in my blood. I reached out and opened the book. The pages hissed, a sound like silk tearing underwater. Inside, names, each one written in ink so dark it looked like it bled from the parchment itself. Some names were crossed out, others were smeared beyond recognition. But one thing was clear, every name was a bride. I flipped the pages faster. Bride 12, Lyneth Rowe. Bride 13, Helena Dar. Bride 14, Sorrel Keene. Bride 15, blank. The space after the number pulsed like it wanted to swallow mine. And underneath the blank line, a single sentence was etched in jagged script. The vow is starving. I closed the book, heart hammering. That's when I saw it beneath the altar. A sliver of black cloth, poking out like a tongue between cracked floorboards. I knelt, pulled. It didn't resist. It unfurled. A veil, but older, heavy with dampness, stained with soil, blood, and ink. It shimmered faintly in the dim light like it knew me. I held it up. A name was stitched into the trim in thread so red it looked alive. Marin Ellicott. My name. Not once. For times. I gasped. I hadn't been bound once. I'd been bound again and again. Wiped clean. Returned. Rewritten. Every time I tried to escape, they reset me. A new dress. A new veil. A new vow. But the same grave waited beneath the altar. My hands shook as I laid the veil back down. That's when I noticed the floorboards beneath it were loose. I pressed down. They sank. And then, a hiss of air. A low, hungry groan. And the boards cracked open like a trapdoor. Stairs led down. Not stone. Not wood. Bone. Polished smooth. Carved with symbols I recognized but didn't understand. And at the bottom, a soft glow. I descended slowly. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, not just temperature cold. Emotionless cold. Like even my thoughts were being scraped clean. And then, a chamber. Circular. Walls lined with wedding dresses. Draped, stained, and breathing. Each one moved gently, as if they remembered the women who once wore them. At the center, pedestal. And on it, a jar. Small. Porcelain. Cracked at the rim. Inside it, teeth. Small. Childlike. And beneath the jar, a note. The ones who refused, we silenced. The ones who remembered, we buried. The ones who survived, we recycled. I staggered back. The room spun. My mind filled with screams that didn't come from me. Dozens. Hundreds. All screaming one word. No. That's when the door above slammed shut. The veil above fell over the stairwell like a curtain. And I knew. They were sealing me in. Again. I scrambled back up the stairs. The veil was too thick to cut. Too dense to move. I pounded the boards. Nothing. No sound got out. But then, from the veil, a whisper. Soft. Female. Say the names. Say them loud. Say them all. I looked back down at the book. Still in my hand. The names. The erased. The forgotten. The rewritten. My voice shook. But I read. Lyneth Rowe. The dresses on the wall rustled. Helena Dar. The lights flickered. Sorrel Keene. A sharp crack in the ceiling. Thorne Everlyn. A boom. The floor shifted. And then, Marin Ellicott. The veil above ignited. Not with flame. With light. The trapdoor burst open. I stumbled into the chapel. The book dissolved in my hands. The veil turned to ash midair. And across the altar, the brides had begun to step forward. But now, They were lifting their veils. I wasn't alone anymore. They remembered, because I said their names, because I refused to let them rot in silence, because I found my own. But it wasn't over. The light dimmed, and from outside, a shriek curled around the chapel like a blade dragging across stone. The vow-keeper was coming, this time not to ask, but to collect. It started as a vibration, so faint I thought it was in my bones. But then the pews rattled, the chandelier swayed, and every stained glass shard in the chapel windows buzzed like trapped wasps. I stepped back from the altar, heart hammering like a fist behind my ribs. From the woods beyond the chapel, something stirred. The vow-keeper. It knew the names had been spoken. It knew the veil had been burned. And now it was coming to take back what had been lost. The brides lined at the edge of the chapel didn't speak. They just lifted their veils, one by one, until their faces stared back at me, pale as ash and wrinkled with memories not meant to last this long. They didn't look alive, but they didn't look dead either. They looked remembered, and remembering is dangerous in this place. Thorn's voice echoed from behind me, breathless but clear. They're waking up because you gave them their names, but they don't know what to do with them yet. What do we do now? I asked, my voice cracking. Thorn's footsteps approached fast. She carried something heavy in her hands. A book different from the one I found, bound in skin, strapped shut with thorns. We show them what they were never allowed to finish. Their refusal. The chapel doors groaned. Splinters cracked inward. Outside, the trees were bowing, their limbs bending unnaturally toward a figure walking between them. The vow-keeper. Each step it took sunk into the earth like it was drawing something up from below. Roots, bones, whispers. Thorn opened the book with a wince. Inside were rituals but inverted, not for binding, but breaking. The language wasn't in English, not fully. Some words crawled, others burned. Some could only be felt, like a scream at the back of your teeth. She looked at me, eyes fierce. You have to read this. Out loud. Why me? Because your vow is still fresh. The soil hasn't swallowed it yet. It listens to you. The ground beneath us cracked. Not from pressure. From hunger. The vow-keeper had arrived at the threshold. Its veil trailed for miles behind it, soaked in blood, embroidered with names too damaged to pronounce. And its face was still nothing, a blank stretch of white silk. But it turned toward me like it knew exactly where I stood. And it whispered, without lips, Bride 15, your turn. I gripped the book with shaking hands. The letters twisted under my gaze. I tried to speak, but my throat locked. The vow still had claws in me, not strong enough to bind, but enough to silence. Marin, Thorn said sharply. Say your name. Say it out loud. I did already. Say it again. But this time mean it. The brides circled around us, not moving forward, not moving back, waiting. I closed my eyes, felt the memory of my name in my chest. Not what the vow made me, but who I was before the ceremony, before the forgetting, before the veil. And I said it. I am Marin Ellicott, and I do not accept this vow. The air shattered, not broke, shattered. Like glass over a speaker blaring silence. The chapel doors burst open, and the vow-keeper took a step inside. Only now it was different. Its veil cracked down the middle, revealing eyes, dozens of them, small, childlike, rotting, all staring at me with the same question. Why didn't you stop it sooner? I dropped the book. The pages turned on their own, spinning like a windmill in a hurricane. Page tore free. Flew upward, and burned, not like paper, like flesh. And the scream that followed didn't come from me. It came from every bride in the room. Thorn raised her arm, and they stepped forward. Together, one step, another, each whispering their names. Lineth, Helena, Sorel, Thorn, Marin. The vow-keeper staggered. It didn't fall, but it weakened. Its veil curled at the ends. His arms sagged. The rings around its neck began to melt, dripping like candle wax into the chapel floor. I picked up the final page. Blank. Except for one single line at the top. Bride 16. The vow was hungry. Still seeking. Still open. Still unfinished. I turned it toward the vowkeeper. No more, I said, and I tore it in half. The reaction was instant. The chapel cracked at its center. Light poured through the stained glass. Gold and red, flickering like flame. The vowkeeper screamed. His veil caught fire. Its body withered, folding in on itself like paper in a storm. And the last thing it said, in a voice that was mine, "We were just trying to be remembered." The altar split. The brides scattered. Not in fear, in freedom. Some faded. Some laughed. Some looked up, as if seeing sky for the first time in centuries. And Thorn? She smiled. A real smile. Tears fell from her eyes, thick and dark. "They'll come again, you know," she whispered. I nodded. "I'll be ready." Outside, the sun broke through the trees, but the cemetery remained. Not empty, not haunted, just waiting, because the vow is older than words, older than names. But names are what set us free, and now I knew mine. They say when a curse is broken, there's peace, a soft hush, a breath of stillness. But I didn't feel peace. I felt echoes, like the vow hadn't ended, just fractured. And something behind it was still watching. The cemetery looked different in daylight. Less like a graveyard, more like a forgotten garden. The brides were gone, faded like steam off stone. But I wasn't alone. Thorn stood near the altar, shoulders hunched, her expression tight. The melted rings once chained to the vowkeeper were now scattered across the grass, hissing faintly, evaporating into dust. But one remained, intact, and it was etched with a name I hadn't heard since I was a child. Graham Ellicott, my father. I stared at it. My legs went cold. He wasn't a bride. He couldn't have been bound. So why? Thorn didn't meet my eyes. "You need to see something," she said. We walked in silence, past the gate, down a narrow gravel path lined with trees that bent slightly inward, as if listening. Thorn led me to a rusted shed tucked behind the old caretaker's house. She pried open the door. Inside, dust hung in the air like smoke, and nailed to the back wall was a ledger. Huge, black leather, locked shut with a clasp made of bone. She opened it slowly, revealing rows of names, amounts, dates. At the top of the page, offering registrants, year 2006. My breath caught. That was the year I turned 8. The year I'd been bound the first time. And next to my name, scrawled in bold script, was a signature. Graham Ellicott. Followed by a mark I didn't recognize. A crest. Half a heart, half a thorned ring. "He signed you in," Thorn said quietly, "before you ever knew what a vow was." I shook my head. "No, he wouldn't. He loved me." Thorn didn't speak. She didn't have to, because the truth wasn't just in the ledger. It was in me. Memories began to flood back in pieces. Flash, my father pacing the living room at night, muttering to someone on the phone. "She was born under the sign. I don't have a choice." Flash, my mother, crying into her sleeves, whispering, We promised we'd never sign." Flash, a birthday party with no guests, just candles, and a bouquet of veiled flowers I wasn't allowed to touch. He'd done it to save something, or someone, but he still did it. He signed the page, and they took me. "I need to find him," I said. Thorn raised an eyebrow. "To do what?" "I don't know. Ask him. Yell at him. Understand." "Understand what, Marin? That he handed you over to be erased? How does that help?" I turned to her. "Because if he did this, others are doing it too. And if we don't find out how deep this goes, another girl's going to walk down that aisle." Thorn looked at the ledger, then at me. "I'll go with you," she said. We drove for hours. The road felt longer than it should have. Every mile like it was stitched from different timelines, pulling me back into the self I thought I'd burned in the chapel fire. We reached the old farmhouse where I was raised. Nothing had changed. Same cracked shutters. Same swing limp in the yard. Same porch light flickering, even though it was midday. I got out slowly. Thorn stayed in the car. Some doors, she said. You have to open alone. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and there he was. Graham Ellicott. Older. Grayer. But still him. His eyes landed on me like he'd just seen a ghost. Marin. He reached for me. I stepped back. Don't. He froze. Then said softly, I thought you were gone. My voice cracked. You gave me away. He looked down. Silent. Say it, I demanded. He nodded once. I did. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to collapse into the pain I didn't even know had been festering this long. Instead I asked, why? His eyes welled, but not with pity, with guilt, crushing, like he'd been holding it for decades. You were born during a blood moon, he said. Every third generation, a girl is born who carries the memory back to the first altar. The brides from before time, they're like flares. The vow can smell them. So you gave me away? I tried to delay it. I thought if I signed you early, the ceremony wouldn't bind as deeply, that you wouldn't remember, that maybe you'd escape it entirely. I stared at him, jaw tight. Did Mom know? He broke. She fought me. She left that night. I never saw her again. Silence stretched between us. It didn't heal, but it clarified. I broke the vow, I said. He looked up sharply. You what? I burned the veil. I said my name. I freed the others. The vow-keeper's gone. He looked stunned, then terrified. Marin, he whispered. You don't understand. The vow-keeper is only one branch. The vow runs deeper. And now that you've burned the face of it, the root is going to grow. I felt it in that moment. A shiver not on my skin. In my blood. Something had shifted. Not ended. Reawakened. And outside, Thorn stood up slowly, eyes wide. Because behind the house, in the reflection of the window, the figure had appeared. Not veiled. Not human. Just teeth. Grinning. Waiting. They say the deeper the vow, the harder it is to break. But some vows? They don't just bind you. They bury you. The reflection in the window wasn't my father. And it wasn't me. It wasn't even veiled like the vow-keeper. It was older. And it smiled like it had been waiting since before language, since before names. I ran outside, Thorn already backing away from the porch. You saw it too? I asked, voice sharp. She nodded. It was never gone. It just moved. The soil beneath the swing creaked. A pulse rippled through the earth, like something below us was breathing. Thorn pointed to the oak in the yard. Roots burst from its base, blackened and slick with bride thread. They weren't roots anymore. They were veins, and they pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. What is that? I whispered. Thorn's voice was hollow. That's the root vow, the original, the first binding, the mother of the brides. My father stepped out behind us. His face was pale, his hands trembling. She's waking up, he said. Who? I asked. His mouth opened. But before he could speak, the ground split. It didn't crack like in the chapel. Peeled, layer by layer, like flesh torn back from bone. And from beneath it, a hand emerged. Long fingers, thin as vines, wrapped in lace. The fingernails engraved with names. Not etched, buried. The hand pulled upward, and a figure rose. Not just veiled, not just wrapped in silk. Rooted. The first bride. The true bride. They called her Aridel. Thorn gasped. She was the one who wanted the vow. I turned to her. I thought the vow was something done to women. Thorn's eyes were glass. It was. But it started with her. She made it. She offered herself. Not for love, not for sacrifice. For control. Aridel stood fully now. Dirt and centuries clung to her like armor. Her veil was made of bark and bone. Her skin looked like melted wax, stretched too tight. But her mouth, her smile was perfect, unscarred, alive. She spoke. You burned my altar. You tore my veil. But you never touched my roots. I stepped forward, fists clenched. Let them go. All the girls. All the names. End it. She tilted her head. I gave them eternity. You gave them doubt. Thorn stepped beside me. You enslaved them. No, Aradel whispered. I preserved them. Before me they vanished. Forgotten. Abandoned. But with my vow they lived on. In silence, yes, but silence is safe. I felt it then. The pressure in my head. The urge to agree. To kneel. To give in. That was her power. Not just binding through rituals, but persuasion. Making compliance feel like salvation. I spoke my name. Louder this time. Marin Ellicott. Aradel flinched. A crack formed across her wrist. I said another. Thorn Everlyn. Another crack. Thorn caught on. She whispered names. Fast. One after another. Sorel Keen. Helena Dar. Lineth Rowe. Each name splintered Aradel's skin. Because the power of the vow came from erasure. And we were undoing it. Aradel screamed. A sound like roots tearing through metal. She raised her hand, and the oak behind her withered. Veins of dark silk snapped from the earth and shot toward us. But I reached into my coat and pulled out the last page of the bride book. The one I'd kept hidden. The one that had Bride 16 at the top. Still blank. I held it toward her. You want another name? I shouted. She froze. Here, I said. Take yours. And I scrawled it. Aradel. The page burned. But this time the fire didn't stop at the parchment. It raced along the roots, up her dress, through her veil. Aradel screamed again, not in rage, in loss, because the vow was never meant to bind her. And now it did. She staggered, crumbling, and the roots around the yard burst into flame. The sky turned black, then white, and then stillness. When I opened my eyes, the ground was smooth, unbroken. The swing swayed gently. No roots, no veil, no Aradel. Thorn stood beside me, ash on her hands. We didn't speak, because we didn't need to. It was over. I returned to the chapel one last time. The altar was gone. The dresses had vanished. But at the center of the floor, etched into the wood, a single line. Say their names and they live. Forget them, and she returns. I whispered them all. Every name I could remember. And then, finally, my own. Marin Ellicott. Survivor. The vow was buried. But a memory is what kept us free. And I would never let them be forgotten again. If you want more chilling true crime stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the Veil of Secrets.